Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see you. Good to see some people I don't know. It's great to see that. Becky and I are just freshly back from Ireland, where we're at a meeting that Becky has. She's on the board of directors of a foundation, and I was supposed to do sermon preparation, and I didn't do very much, I'm afraid. But this is, as Megan said, it's fresh off the press. The last few weeks we've been going through Psalm 23. And Tommy, our pastor, has already taken us through the first four verses. And let me just kind of summarize as best I can, Tommy. I hope I don't murder these. The first week was, the Lord is my shepherd even when. And he kind of left that open to even when I doubt, even when I'm not following, even when. So that was the way he left it. The Lord is my shepherd. He not was my shepherd, but he is my shepherd and will be my shepherd. The second week, he says, basically verse 2 says, we have a shepherd who is faithful, personal, and present. Number 3 is, we have a shepherd who is restoring the soul to the right path even after it has wandered. And verse 4 is, we have a shepherd who leads us, walks with us, protects us, and has already gone ahead of us. So that's where we are today as we come into verse 5. And we saw, let's see, today we move from a scene of a shepherd who's out in the wilderness, out in open country, to a scene at a table in the house of the Lord. We go from the outside world to the inside world. We go from outwardness to inwardness. David, first of all, remember this is the first two words are God is a shepherd. God is my shepherd. Yahweh, it's actually, if you read the Hebrew, it is Yahweh. If you know a little bit about Hebrew, and Jewish people, they would never say that. They would say Adonai, the Lord. And so that's why in your English Bibles, it's often L-O-R-D in all capitals. Okay? So the first part of this psalm has been all about Yahweh, the good shepherd. But now he shifts to a new scene. Yahweh, the generous host. Okay, it's a table. It's the idea of somehow being invited to a meal. Now, if you know anything about me, some of my favorite movies are about food, and one of the most recent ones, I don't know if you remember this, is 100-Foot Journey. It's about a family who's from India. They're escaping some kind of violence. They settle in a small French village, and they open an Indian eatery, an Indian restaurant, which puts them in direct competition from the famous Michelin star restaurant just across the street. Anybody seen this movie? Who hasn't seen this movie? Also you are. And in the dark, you really need to see this movie. The 100-Foot Journey. Well, anyway, they get into competition. A bitter rivalry ensues between the new restaurant and the snobbish owner of the French establishment, Madame Mallory, played by Helen Mirren, until she discovers that Kadam's son, Hassan, is an extraordinary culinary prodigy. And Hassan's talent for blending Indian flavors with French haute cuisine bridges the two cultures, which leads to a professional partnership. And through food, Hassan finds romance and reconciliation and the ending of the feud between the families. Then there's Julie and Julia. Anybody who's not seen that one? Anybody? A lot of seen people. No? Oh gosh. Okay, if you like food, you have to see these movies. The film tells us two true stories of the legendary French chef Julia Child and her early culinary career, as well as Julie Powell in 2002, who undertakes to cook all 524 recipes in Julia Child's 2-volume set. Okay, she does it in 1 year. And the story is about Julia Child as she struggles in a man's world. It was a male-dominated cooking world. But Julie is a modern-day blogger who uses the project to find purpose and escape at a dead-end job. Both stories highlight the themes of passion and perseverance and supportive relationships. The stories of both women show how passion for food and writing could redefine one's life. Finally, one of my absolute favorites, and it was Sharon Benson, who is not here tonight, who told me about this. Anybody not seen Babette's Feast? Okay, this is a must. You must see Babette's Feast. Babette's Feast is a really wonderful, because it has these incredible cooking scene and eating scene. It's a story by Karen Blixen, who's also known as Isak Dinesen, and she wrote Out of Africa. It tells a story of a French refugee named Babette who finds a home with two pious elderly sisters in a remote 19th century Danish village. She works as their servant for 14 years. Unbeknownst to the sisters, Babette is the famous French chef of Paris. After unexpectedly winning a very large sum of money in the lottery, Babette spends her entire fortune to prepare an opulent, authentic French meal for the sisters and their austere community, church community. The sumptuous meal transforms the dour, bickering community, bringing them together in a moment of grace and joy and reconciliation, proving that the grateful servant's gift is a supreme act of love. In each of these movies, great things happen through food and feasts. And similar things happen in meals in the Bible. For example, take David and Mephibosheth. Say that 3 times. Mephibosheth was the son of Jonathan, who was a great friend of David. And David wanted to show kindness to the house of Saul because Jonathan was a son of Saul. And so he finds Mephibosheth, who is lame in both feet, and he's living in poverty. He's hiding and fearing for his life because he is the grandson of Saul, the enemy of David. David restores all of Saul's land to Mephibosheth and gives him a permanent seat at the royal table, treating him as one of his own sons. The seat at the royal table symbolizes the picture of unearned grace. Despite Mephibosheth's brokenness and fears, David elevates him from poverty to royalty based solely on the covenant of friendship between he and Jonathan. Next, there's the story of Jesus and Levi. Jesus meets Levi one day, and he calls him to be one of his disciples, and Levi immediately throws a great banquet at his house where he invites Jesus to eat with his friends, many of whom are tax collectors and sinners. The Pharisees criticized Jesus for eating with them because of their negative social status and because they were a group that was very displeasing to God. But it was at the supper that Jesus explained that it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. This demonstrates that Jesus' grace is available to all, regardless of reputation, and challenges the social barriers, highlighting the inclusion of the marginalized. Then there's the anointing of Jesus by a sinful woman. Luke 7, verses 35 to 50 tells a story of a quote-unquote sinful woman who, out of profound gratitude for having been forgiven by Jesus, interrupts a dinner party hosted by a Pharisee named Simon, and she's there to anoint his feet. She stands behind Jesus, weeping so heavily that her tears wash his feet. She wipes them with her hair, kisses them, and anoints them with costly perfume from an alabaster jar. As he watches, Simon thinks to himself, if Jesus were a true prophet, he would know she is unclean and sinful and would not allow her to touch him. Jesus, knowing Simon's thoughts, tells a parable about 2 debtors, one owing 500 denarii and another 50. Both are forgiven. But Jesus makes the point that the one with the larger debt loves more. Jesus publicly contrasts the woman's actions with Simon's lack of traditional hospitality. Jesus was given no water for his feet and no kiss of welcome. He says that the woman's many sins are forgiven because of her kindness, her self-sacrifice, which showed that through faith she loved much. And finally, the Last Supper. And of course, this is Jesus is sharing a Passover meal with his disciples with Jerusalem on the night before his crucifixion. And 3 significant things happen. Jesus identifies Jesus as his betrayer. He breaks bread as a symbol of his body given for them. He shares wine as a symbol of his blood, establishing a new covenant for the forgiveness of sins. And he also washes his disciples' feet to model humility and service. This meal establishes the Lord's Supper as an enduring remembrance of his death, marking the shift from the old covenant to the new. It symbolizes Christ's ultimate sacrifice, offering spiritual sustenance and fellowship to his believers. Now, in all four of these Bible stories, significant thing happened. At all four tables, the external world of sin and brokenness leads to truth about the internal world of grace and forgiveness. Under the Holy Spirit's inspiration, God uses meals at tables in the external world to guide us to truths of internal spiritual realities. So let's go back to our psalm. First, verse 5 speaks of a table that God, the Good Shepherd, sets for David. This image of the table moves us from the external world of the wilderness and the open country to the internal world of God's house. As we approach the table, let's remember that David has changed how he's speaking about God. He moves from the third person to the first person. He moves from describing the shepherd to talking to the shepherd. He moves from saying, he makes me lie down, he leads me, he refreshes me, he guides me, to, you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table. You anoint my head. And your goodness and love. We're now in a more personal setting of a generous host. The Lord, Yahweh, becomes a generous host who sets a table of feasting where a guest is given a warm welcome of the comfort of oil for his head. Yahweh is the generous host whose table is so full that the cup never runs dry but overflows. So let's take a look more closely at the table. First of all, he says, you prepare a table, and this is the table of the Lord. It is the table of a king. It is no mean table. It's a banquet table fit for the Lord who is king. And he says, let the feast begin. So with the sumptuous food and the overflowing cups, David the guest will linger a long time at this table. Surely the guest will take in sustenance that's needed, but it is more than simple sustenance. This is a rich table. It is filling. But not only food is offered, the guest is sitting with the king. The guest communes with the king. This is a table of fellowship. It's not just the eating. There is the enjoyment of the company of the generous host. Now before the feast begins, the opulent host makes us comfortable. The outer world of sun and heat has dried us out. Our skin has cracked, so he gives us oil for our heads, the oil that soothes the sunburnt skin, the oil that helps heal cracked, windburned skin. And the oil is fragrant. It's healing. And the fragrance overwhelms the senses. And it's that oil that symbolizes the comfort and healing of the Lord. When we are in his presence, we experience the healing and refreshment. And that's what David is speaking about, being in the presence of the generous host who knows how to heal and to refresh, just like he talked about in the first part of the psalm. However, the specialness of the table does not end with the rich, good spiritual food and the fellowship, the good fellowship with the generous host. This table has another goal. It is a table of honor because of the table is the table of the king. But it is a table where something enormous is going to happen with the guests. He sets a table in the presence of my enemies. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Now, why would this generous host invite the guests' enemies? This has been a source of confusion for many people. Normally, we want to get away from enemies. We don't want to dine with them. C.S. Lewis, in his book, Reflections on the Psalms, struggled with these words. He thought, how could God the shepherd invite the honored guest not only to gloat over the defeated enemies, He felt the image of the host spreading a feast while enemies are forced to watch represented a spiteful rather than a holy sentiment. He preferred to see God's love in terms of protection and eternal peace rather than triumphalism over enemies. But maybe that's not what's happening here. Maybe what's happening is that the enemies are invited for a redeeming purpose. Remember that when David invited Mephibosheth, this was to redeem the family of Saul. Saul became the great enemy of David when Saul was alive, but nevertheless, to honor Jonathan, Mephibosheth was invited to become a permanent fixture at the king's table. The enemy of the family of Saul, David's enemy, was redeemed. As we saw in several of the meals that Jesus shared, the Pharisees are present, and they are, in effect, his enemies. They were critical of him. They tried to catch him in his words so they could even condemn him to death. But Jesus used these opportunities to teach his enemies. He used those moments to warn the enemies of the consequences of their actions. He taught them the great truths of the kingdom. He used them to show the grace he offered. He used these meals to show forgiveness. At the table of the Good Shepherd, at the table of the generous host, enemies are there so they might become allies and friends. I was recently reminded of the reconciliation between the bitter enemies of World War II. The United States was the enemy of Japan, Germany, and Italy. But those wounds were healed, and they're now allies. They're on friendly terms. This generous host deals with the outer world, but also the inner world. The enemies that have only hate and bitterness toward each other can be reconciled. At the table of the host, the bitterest enemies can enjoy the fellowship of the king and be reconciled. The outer world of fighting and battles caused by the inner world of hatred and jealousy can be changed. Here in the Psalms, we have a truly wonderful table and remarkable table. Like the Good Shepherd who leads and guides to a place of peace and sustenance, like the Good Shepherd who protects even in the most dark and difficult places, this generous host refreshes and restores. He gives guidance in how to be in the presence of enemies. Psalm 23 has the metaphor of the outer world of the wilderness and the inner world of God's eternal house. It shows us two views of God and two views of where he meets us. He meets us in the physical outer world. Tonight we're celebrating communion, and so we're meeting God in that outer physical world. But he also meets us in the inner world of the soul. In the inner world of the soul, there is a table. Am I off? Okay. Yeah, there's a table where the spiritual sustenance, it never ends. Where communion with God brings comfort, and when we have peace and are reconciled with the difficulties we encounter. In the inner world, we have a place of spiritual food, communion with the Lord, and a peace in the midst of turmoil. The table of Psalm 23, verse 5, is an inward vision of a table where David has communion with God. No physical table can satisfy like this table of inwardness. I left my book down here. Let me get. In case you're wondering, this idea of the table of inwardness comes from a book of that title. A man named Calvin Miller wrote it, and it's a book about how Psalm 23 guides us metaphorically to meet God in our inner life. That's why I'm speaking about the outer and the inner, that the inner life is important. And he says, in search of God I often take my ordered world apart, to learn that when my search was done, I found him in my very heart. And he says, inwardness is the place where the believer and his Lord meet. And over the last number of years, I've been exploring this whole area of inwardness. That often we're so busy in the outer world, but silence and solitude are a door to the inner life. And this table, this metaphor of the table, is one of the things that has guided me to be able to meet God as this generous host. And as I said, no physical table can satisfy like this table of inwardness. And it's a table that is always there for us to go and to meet with the Lord. It's a table where souls are refreshed by Jesus, the Good Shepherd. So how shall we end this? Well, like David, at this table, you can come to have fellowship with the Lord. It is a view that we have from our souls. In our souls, we sit at this table of inwardness. The Good Shepherd that we long for invites us to his table. As we hunger and thirst for the love of God, as we crave the presence of God, this table waits for us. And we are never disappointed. For at the table, we sup with the Lord, we share his time, and he shares his love with us. If there are people with whom we are at odds, even there, we can have peace. Either the Lord vindicates us or our enemies become friends. As we love our enemies at this table, bitterness and enmity can cease. In our inner life, God helps us rehearse how to make peace with enemies. So come to the table. Meet with Jesus. Enjoy his company. Find that place of closeness with the Good Shepherd who provides for us and feeds and saves us. Let me share with you a poem that Calvin Miller wrote about this. It's called The Table. In this secluded place, I meet a king. He comes to drink reality with me. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we sit. A sip, a life that passes by the crowd. An inwardness is born, a felted thing, of power, a commonality, a union where unmended hopes are knit, where silence roars as quiet sings aloud. Oh, Christ, I love it here. It is our place. Speak, Lord, or not. Touch me, or not. Show then your will or bid me wait in patient grace. Fill all my hungry need with joy again, with simple loaves of bread and chaliced wine. Heaven, earth, and all of God are mine. As we kind of go into the end of this service, and perhaps as you go home, ask yourselves these questions. What would you like to see on the table? What nourishment do you need from Jesus, the Good Shepherd? What comfort do you need? What do you need to be comforted from? What enemies do you need to be reconciled with? What enemies do you need protection from? As you sit with Jesus, what would you like to say to him? As you sit at the table with Jesus, what would you like to hear him say? And finally, what do you need from Jesus as you sit at the table of inwardness? Now, I realize that these questions may be stirring things inside of you, and if you'd like to come after the service and pray, some elders will be up here. I'll be up here. Tommy, Claire, we can pray with you, or if you'd just like to sit afterwards and pray. But I encourage you to take this moment after communion to remain at the table. Let this psalm guide you to that table of inwardness where you can meet with Jesus.